President Trump is threatening to use increasing trade wars over intellectual property and tariffs on Chinese goods in order to get them to try and help with North Korea. And he said he would go easy on them, on the Chinese exports to the United States if they were to help with North Korea. So this is a very interesting situation we have now with trade wars. I'm going to talk about free trade in general. In general, I think there's an argument to be made that there's really no such thing as free trade between really any countries. Mercantilism, where countries have tried to cheat with either manipulating their currency exchange rate, with subsidizing large monopoly or large corporations in their industry that have some type of advantage, either subsidizing them with incentives or other types of monopolies, or putting tariffs on imports has almost always existed. So you can go back and look at different tariffs. There's enormous tariffs on a lot of American companies, say trying to sell cars into Japan or South Korea. Just to name a few, especially for motorcycles, American motorcycles like Harley Davidson, go and try to sell one of those in an Asian country and the tariffs are very high. And it's like that way for a lot of other goods as well. So there's really no such thing as free trade. Some of my other listeners in the past have said that the U.S. has been in a trade war with China for a very long time and didn't realize it. What I would also count, and some of that may be true, but Trump escalating things and retaliating in a trade war, really no one's going to win that. American factory workers, it's not going to create a whole bunch of new jobs. Yes, factories like Foxconn may come back and invest. I believe the plan here, I'll attach this article. This is a Washington Post article, but there's actually some good research in there. It's not as super bullish as what the Trump administration is saying. So it says with the Foxconn investment into Wisconsin, under the agreement, Wisconsin would pay Foxconn up to $3 billion in subsidies over the next 15 years in refundable tax credits. There's research out that it could take 25 years to break even. Foxconn is claiming, though, that that Foxconn is going to spend $10 billion of its own money to build a factory in the state, and it would there would be a multiplier effect with other service sector jobs in addition to the factory workers' jobs, and it could employ approximately 13,000 workers, American workers, once the factory is up and running at full strength. And so the claim is that $6.7 of private investment for every dollar of public funds, that's a net positive. But there may also be more robotics and automation. So there's no guarantee that all those humans will actually be employed. That's the numbers now, but that number could change significantly. It could drop down to 1,000 or 2,000, and the majority of the factory could be automated. So yes, there will be high-paying jobs. Yes, that will help a certain group of people, but there's still a lot of subsidies. So this is not, free market. This is cronyism still, in my opinion. But yeah, the trade is extremely complicated, guys. And I think if Trump does escalate things with China, he's running the risk of basically becoming Herbert Hoover. And let me tell you why. So after the Great Depression 1929 started on Black Tuesday, most historians say it started on Black Tuesday with the stock market crash October 29th, 1929, I believe. And so what happened then was the Congress started passing crazy amounts of tariff deals, and they tried to subsidize U.S. farmers to either pay them higher crop prices than market prices. They wouldn't let prices fall. They pay them to let crops die. So there was large soup and bread lines. But if they would have let the prices on agriculture fall a lot, the poor people who had a job probably could have afforded cheaper food. But that's not what happened. So a lot of historians, especially ones that aren't Keynesian, and I'll attach research here. There's a lot of excellent articles on Smoot-Hawley tariff and the Great Depression from a lot of different authors on the Foundation for Economic Education website. Smoot-Hawley definitely, if you go and do the research and read a bunch of these articles and compare them with what the mainstream media and mainstream economists say, Smoot-Hawley definitely made the Depression a lot worse. So, if Trump does escalate this trade war, that's where, with China, that's where things are heading. I do not think it will bring back nearly as many jobs as a lot of people are claiming. There will be some investment coming back into the United States if Trump does put tariffs on, but two wrongs don't really make a right. I mean, no country should really be doing this in the first place. But before I go, though, I want to share you some of the statements. I mean, the Chinese basically get it. The Chinese have been running a dollar peg. There is high tariffs on certain imported U.S. goods. The Chinese do not allow American corporations, technology companies into China to have, intellectual property protection. A lot of the Chinese, if you're looking for good investments, Chinese technology companies like Alibaba and Baidu and Sohu and Tencent and those have been benefiting from the laws that the mainland Chinese government has put in place against U.S. technology companies. So some of the larger Chinese technology companies are doing extraordinarily well because they have protective policies in place compared to, well, actually, U.S. technology companies have monopolies here. So, I mean, it's a messed up what they're doing with my YouTube channel and the censorship and all the other bullshit. So, I guess they're... intellectual property... I don't want to talk about intellectual property in this video. It's too complicated of an issue right now. But anyway, though, I'm going to attach articles here where a Chinese trade ambassador has said there will be no winner. China warns against the U.S. trade war. So he outlined the speech saying, I believe China and U.S. should continue to work together for the stable and sound development of China-U.S. economic and trade relations. You can read more of the statement here. And then there was an op-ed in the China Daily, which is a state-run English-speaking newspaper, and it's talking about Trump's trade policies as well. So I don't think escalating a trade war will really benefit a lot of people on Main Street in the United States. I know there's a good amount of my listeners that think that that's what will happen, but in my opinion, the end result would be consumers would be paying more money for a lot of goods. Some supplies, it could lead to resource wars, and some supplies could not be available. There could be shortages of certain things like rare earth metals for electronics and others. So this could become a very tenuous situation really quickly. So escalating trade wars, if you go back and look through history, do not normally work out for either side. So there's a lot of Americans out there that are blaming China for a lot of the economic problems. I think there's an argument to be made that not only did large corporations not want to pay American workers higher wages over the decades when they offshored and outsourced jobs, but they also knew that there was a lot of inflation already in the system. And one way, because U.S. consumers and U.S. savers didn't have the capital, was to get them Chinese goods that they could actually still afford. So the Walmarts and the others, one of the ways they figured for the customers to be able to continue to afford some of the prices was they knew that they had to reduce the costs. But, the trade-off is with these cheap labor and cheap goods, a lot of these goods guys tend to break so quickly. I remember reading a lot of economics books and speaking to, like, my grandparents, how long a lot of things used to last. A lot of items used to last. And a lot of things nowadays, guys, they just... It's almost as if they're intentionally built to break pretty quickly and you have to reorder them. So trade is, in general, I think trade is a complicated situation. Takeaway from the video is there's never really been free trade because mercantilism has been around for many, many hundreds of years. Really since the Bank of England was created, and even before that, there was attempts by, the king to pick out privileged large corporations, like give them charters and others with subsidized trade in exchange for monopolies and other profits. So there's always been winners and losers in trade, even before central banks like the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve were created, but those guys have exacerbated things. And then you have, Congress. Congress doesn't really know any real economics, so they step in and they start putting in, wage and price controls, which also happened during the Great Depression in 1929. Herbert Hoover and Congress, besides Smoot-Hawley and other subsidies, started putting in wage and price controls, and that just exacerbated the problem. The Chinese, if you read these articles that I'm going to link to you here, the Chinese have mentioned how things are going to get exacerbated. So, I'm not saying either side hasn't made huge mistakes, but I'm saying it's a complicated situation, and there really is, in terms of global trade, there really is no free markets and no free trade, because whether it's manipulating your currency with a currency peg, either a euro peg or a dollar peg, or putting subsidies to key either crony corporations like U.S. and solar companies, or U.S. giving sugar subsidies, or I can name a bunch of them. There's a bunch of either large corporations or small politically connected ones to Al Gore and others that have gotten ridiculous, kickbacks and subsidies, or heavy tariffs on imported goods. It's a complicated situation. And, Trump could potentially make things worse. And that would be where the Trump comparison with a Herbert Hoover or President Nixon, where President Nixon increased wage and price controls in the 1970s after he took the dollar, severed the dollar's last vestiges with the gold standard. And then, you have maybe some potential Jimmy Carter where you have the stagflation increasing. So President Trump, economically speaking, could end up to be like a Herbert Hoover, President Nixon, or a Jimmy Carter in that regard. And we all know that President Trump would prefer to see himself, as being kind of Ronald Reagan. Okay, well, that's it for today. That's today's short video. Hope you guys like it. And feel free to comment in the comment section about your opinion on trade. I think it's a lot more complicated than a lot of you guys expect, where the U.S. should just retaliate and that'll fix things, especially when you add in automation and robotics. Because with automation and robotics accelerating, the odds of these enormous factories with a lot of human factory workers is going to decrease. There is going to be high-paying jobs, but there's going to be less of them. You're going to have to either do the software systems for the robots or learn to repair them, or come up with new types of automation and robotics, because that's the way a lot of the factories are going nowadays. Whether it's, a consumer goods company like Johnson & Johnson, or a razor blade company, or an automobile manufacturer, or computer chips like Intel. Go back and look from 20 years ago about how many human beings were making chips and how many are making semiconductors, these microchips today. It's compared to when Intel was a couple decades ago. It's very few humans now and almost all fully automated. Okay, bye. Wall Street for Main Street needs your help. YouTube stole $7,200 from Wall Street for Main Street in annualized YouTube AdWords revenues, and they kneecapped our analytics down by more than 80% across the board since September 2016 with their new censorship algorithms to stop the rapid growth of our channel. That was money we could have used to upgrade our website, pay bills, and invest in improving our content and growing our business. Our audience of loyal listeners is all over the globe, and so large now that if most or all of our listeners were to commit to donating $1 to $5 each month to our Patreon account, we could easily meet our goal on Patreon. Wall Street for Main Street also accepts one-time donations on our main wallstreetformainstreet.com website. That's WALLSTFORMAINST.com website via PayPal, Gold Money, or Bitcoin. We also accept donations of physical precious metals that can be mailed to us. Thanks to all listeners who have already made a donation, and thanks in advance to any listeners who make a future donation or contribution to the growth, improvement, and success of Wall Street for Main Street.